CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Africa has the world's largest population of young people and the highest rate of youth unemployment globally. Currently, 60% of the unemployed on the continent are youth. This will spiral to about 70% by 2050, according to the World Bank. While higher education has long been seen as an avenue for finding skilled and well-paid employment. However, according to a World Bank report, even highly skilled young people in Africa increasingly find themselves working low-paying, unskilled jobs or remaining unemployed after graduation. This week on Talk Africa, we take a closer look at higher education and employment and ask if Africa's tertiary education programs are of high enough quality and also whether they are providing graduates with the skills they need in today's evolving job market. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Enrollment at universities across Africa has increased by over 4% annually over the last few decades, which begs the question, what happens after graduation? To shed some light on this, I sat down with Raphael Obonyo, a public policy and youth specialist who has also served on UN Habitat's Youth Advisory Board and is the co-founder of the Youth Congress here in Kenya. Raphael is also a graduate of Kenya's largest public university, the University of Nairobi. Raphael, thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Let's start with your academic background because you have an undergraduate degree from the University of Nairobi. You have another master's degree from the University of Duke in the United States. How beneficial have these degrees been for you, particularly in transitioning into the marketplace?
Thanks so much for hosting me. The essence of education is action, what you do with whatever you get, knowledge and skills. Having gone through my undergraduate here in Kenya and master's in the United States at Duke University, I would say that the academic system, the education system in Kenya, like it is in many parts of Africa, emphasizes more on qualifications, what they call exams, more than provision of practical skills. While in the developed world, the US and the UK emphasizes more on provision of skills more than the qualifications. If I look at Kenya, or if I look at my undergrad, I think it didn't prepare me enough to fit into the labor market, to help me in terms of my career aspirations, because the focus was so much about what did you get in your exams, while at my master's I was able to get a lot of practical skills which I've been able to utilize in terms of my career progression.
How much though does this affect unemployment? Because we talk about the youth bulge in Africa and we talk about high unemployment in Africa, but then you're talking about the skills not being transferable into the workplace. How much of this contributes to unemployment?
Definitely our education system contributes to a large extent to the levels of unemployment that we have in the continent. 60% of jobless people now in the continent are actually young people who are actually, expressed a lot of dismay and frustrations at the education systems that we have, that it does not propel them to their career aspirations. In fact, there was a research study that was done, and the findings are that 50% of graduates in the continent are not able to get jobs. Obviously, because the education system, like I did say, emphasizes more on qualifications, does not provide young people with the skills they need to be able to fit in the labor market. And so the mismatch between the skills provided in our education system and the requirement of the labor market is a great contributor to the high unemployment rate amongst young people in the continent.
Looking at the youth themselves, though, are they thinking outside the box? Because we're talking about our education system being, Africa's education system being rather stagnant. Are the youth starting to think outside the box because they are probably not receiving in the workforce what they had trained for in a university curriculum?
I think they're starting to think, just like you put it. They're starting to think, but they are not there yet. Not as much as is expected. Many young people still go to school to find jobs or to be employed later on. But we realize that today it's not about being employed, it's about also being able to create jobs, being able to create employment opportunities for other people. And so I think there is need for change of mindset and change of attitude by young people, amongst young people, to start thinking not in terms of how am I going to get a job, but more about how am I going to create jobs, because the levels of unemployment are so high. And if you look at the formal sector, only so many jobs can be created by government, or even by private sector. I think that is why there's a big push now and a call for young people to start thinking in terms of becoming entrepreneurs. I mean, there's need to start thinking as job creators more than as job seekers.
In your view, with a changing economic system, with a changing African sphere, what would be the ideal if young people were to be catered for, if the system was to cater for all stakeholders, the education system, the labor market, and the young people?
First of all, it's important to listen to all the stakeholders, and for young people is to try and look at what are their interests today. No one wants to wait until they've graduated to start thinking of a career. I think it's important to start helping them to move towards building interest or developing interest in their careers at very early stages, very formative stages. You want someone at age 10 is already clear on what they want to be when they grow up. We should also move away from just qualifications to providing young people with the skills that they need to be able to fit into the labor market later on. But we must also, in trying to review our education curriculum, we shouldn't disrupt people who've invested so much to be part of the existing education system. For example, the teachers. As we remodel and review our education system, we must also take into their consideration their interests. How do we retrain them so that we do not lay them off because they do not have the skills to be able to fit into the reviewed education system? The private sector, how do we bring them on board? Government must realize that they're not the only players. We need all these other players, and I think so it's very important for them to talk to each other more than at each other.
Raphael, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Now, we also spoke to a cross-section of current university students across Africa and asked to what extent they feel their degrees match the needs of the job market and what they plan to do after graduation. Let's take a look.
I do think that it does match the requirements of the job market today, especially in film and television. For instance, in terms of briefs, in terms of getting things specifically within a short amount of time. The intensity here in terms of what I study is actually, it has helped me a bit in terms of reframing and reshaping what I should do and how I should do it.
In the mass comm field, most people actually ask for the experienced people that, okay, they have knowledge about the media in quotes and everything. So yes, it can get me a job because I'm specialized in this area and all. And no, because right now, Nigeria is not, most people are not really focused about, okay, the fact that you studied this course is what would give you the job.
Honestly, my degree is useless. A lot of people graduate from university, but they never do anything with their degrees. I know someone who graduated from the Faculty of Law, but he's a tuk-tuk driver. Another one graduated from the Faculty of Commerce, but he's working in a spare parts shop.
As much as people say that courses offered do not have space in the outside market, I think also we should be creative enough. Because personally, I'm taking psychology and sociology, and my intention is not to go out there and look for employment. My intention is to use the knowledge that I've been given to go and apply it in the outside market with the creativity that I have inside of me.
Well, joining me now to unpack education and employment from South Africa, Dr. Sean Muller. He's a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Johannesburg. From Lagos, Bridget Agba. She's the founder of George Liu Apparels International. And with me here in studio, Stephen Obiro. He's a manager, research and policy advocacy at the Federation of Kenyan Employers. To you all, welcome to Talk Africa today. Bridget, let's start off with you because you've all heard the sentiment of university students across the continent. I'm starting with you, Bridget, because your reality after graduation, you have an English language degree, but you are now in the fashion industry. Did you acquire the skill set in university that enabled you to transition into the job market when you graduated?
No, I did not. I started fashion designing a little before I started English language at the University of Lagos. And prior to that, I noticed that a lot of individuals struggle with getting employment before they, just immediately after the university degree. And I just thought, okay, why not try to get something outside that and try to see if I can function with both effectively.
Did you feel that there were no opportunities in the, in what you studied in university?
There are opportunities, but it isn't as vast as I would want them to be. I would want to train a number of people in English language, and there aren't a lot of people who are employing people for English language, except outside the field of English language. You want to be a banker, you have an English degree, or you want to be in the technology department, you have an English degree. But I wanted something that I could function with effectively, and that wasn't giving me what I wanted.
So, Stephen, Bridget is talking about wanting something that she could function effectively but wasn't getting that. Though, what is it that the market requires today? Are you getting, as an employer, are you getting your requirements from universities and colleges across the continent today?
If you look at the training that's happening and how the graduates are being prepared to come to the job market, there is still a gap with them because most of them are undergoing theoretical training with very little practical experience. And when you go to the job market, then that practical experience becomes very important. They want somebody who can be able to deliver, somebody who has interacted with the kind of equipment, machines, and the work environment that exists, and not just somebody who has been in class alone. So that creates the gap that is there. But then also looking at what Bridget is saying, there is also a challenge here. Is about what you are studying. Is it really something that you have passion about as a person? Is it something that you love and you love to commit the whole of your life doing it? Because many people get themselves into the university and they study things that as individual level they don't have a passion, and when they get out then they find that they cannot be able to venture into that and even further their training, hone their skills in those areas, and then it creates a gap. Yeah.
Right, Dr. Mueller, there is a gap between what universities are teaching and what the job market requires. Do you think that institutions across the continent or institutions that you're familiar with, are they providing the market with what the market really needs when it comes to training students at university?
I think it's quite hard to generalize across the continent, but what I would say is that we also need to think very carefully about what we mean by higher education institutions providing what the market needs. And if one looks at a number of developed countries, one sees undergraduate education that in fact is very flexible. If one thinks about something like a degree in politics, philosophy and economics, which is quite popular in the United Kingdom, students graduate with that degree and go on to do a wide variety of things, including becoming bankers, even though they haven't actually trained in finance. So I think the question is really around issues of perhaps more of quality in terms of the substance of the education that's being provided. Yes, there are some niche technical areas. For example, if you want to work in nanotechnology, then having an English degree is probably not going to be very useful, and ideally you'd probably want to go up to postgraduate level specialization in that. But in many other areas, the question is really around the quality of the education that's being provided, and not necessarily the specific match. I would also say that sometimes the private sector can be a little bit unrealistic in terms of expecting, for example, experience. Candidates can really only get experience on the job, and so while there might be some better scope for collaborations between universities and employers, ultimately there's a certain inevitability in which university training is somewhat theoretical, and they will have to get the experience in the job market itself.
Stephen, what are your thoughts though? Is it about skills mismatch or the lack of quality education?
I think the challenge we're having is both. On one side there is a skills mismatch, where you have many graduates coming from a certain, in a certain sector, and then perhaps the economy of that country across Africa is in a different sector, and most of the jobs are in different sector. So that creates a skills mismatch, and that is because our model of education is still supply-oriented, not demand-oriented. It's not looking at what are the opportunities that exist in the labor market, or what are the needs that are there, so that then the training is geared towards that. It's about the supply. It's about somebody who has qualified to go to the university as an opportunity. He goes to the university. We still have a problem with our labor market information system that can support us to try to see where the demand is. And then on the other side, the quality also has a challenge, because as just the other speaker said, one, much of what is being taught in the universities are theoreticals. There's no any clear model that is put across that ensures that the students who are going through the universities are doing the practical things. There is part which a portion of their study which is being channeled towards the theory, and then another one towards the practicals in the studies. You get that you have some courses where students go to the university, and for all the 4 years, 3 years, or 5 years, they have never seen what it looks like to be at a workplace. And they expect to go and work in these workplaces. Whether you're coming to workplaces as an entrepreneur or you're going to come in as an employee, it is very important that you interact with the workplace and learn the practical things that happen there.
Right. Bridget, let me get your thoughts here, though, because we are looking at your experience as a newly graduated student there. I mean, did you find that there was a skills mismatch when you graduated from university, or did you find that there was quite a lack of quality education to enable you to transition properly?
I totally think that there's a huge mismatch with the universities and the labor market, because a number of times you go out there, you're trying to get a job, and you're being interviewed, and you're asked questions that aren't related to the things that you went to study in school. You're being asked questions outside the field. You're being asked questions that do not totally fit into the labor work. And you're like, okay, so what do I do about this? It's totally outside of it. Hence the reason why I had to go study fashion designing and go and be sure that, okay, this is what I wanted. The quality of education in the universities in Africa need to be enhanced, because right now we're doing traditional education. It's passed down from years to years to years. It's nothing new. It's not a lot revamped. It's a continuous traditional practice. We need experimental education, not theoretical education, rather.
All right, we'll leave it there for a moment. We're going to take a short break. This discussion continues in a short while, and we'll be discussing the possible solutions to the challenges of education and employment in Africa. Don't go away.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, still with me, Dr. Sean Mueller, Bridget Agba, and Stephen Obiro. Before we took the break, we looked at some of the challenges in bridging the gap between education and employment. Let's now take a look at some possible solutions. Dr. Mueller, I'll start off with you, because it is said that an estimated 10 to 12 million Africans graduate from universities each year, enter the job market each year, and yet 60% of Africa's unemployed are youth. So what's the problem?
Well, these are very complicated issues. But what I would say is that we need to be thinking a lot more about the basic education system and its contribution to both youth unemployment and the undesirable outcomes we're seeing from the higher education system. So I mean, the one thing is that it's not entirely appropriate to look at youth unemployment and then compare that to number of graduates. But there's quite a lot of evidence that, in fact, even though graduates have much higher employment rates, that there's quite a lot of underemployment in the sense that graduates are not necessarily engaged in jobs that reflect the education they're supposed to have acquired at university or post-school level. But if one looks at the academic work that's been done, a major issue is that we've had a massive increase in enrollment, partly in pursuit of the Millennium Development Goals. We've had a massive increase in enrollment in basic education, but the quality indicators are in many countries, including South Africa, quite dire when it comes to literacy, numeracy, and so forth. So again, if you're not getting those basics right, it's very hard to build anything upon that. You can't, as I said, you can't train engineers if you don't have enough people with good mathematical skills. And what we find also with a lot of our universities is that they're having to do almost remedial education in order to get school graduates up to speed so that they can then actually engage with the university level curriculum.
I want to come though to you on that issue, but also to look at a study that was released by the African Union on capacity requirements for implementation of the Agenda 2063. And that study found that whereas Africa had about 55,000 engineers, but needed an estimated 4.3 million, also had about 80,000 agricultural scientists, but needed about 150,000 scientists. Clearly, there is a need, but that need is not being met.
Yes, there is a need, and as I said, first of all, that the training in Africa is supply-oriented, not demand-oriented, and that comes into policy. And when government or when the public fund is being invested in the training, you say, okay, we are admitting students into the universities to do a certain degrees, and this is how we are going to fund. Like in Kenya now, you're talking about how we are going to fund either directly to universities or through the Higher Education Loans Board. In a good model, you need to have already projected how many engineers will we need in the coming 5 years, in the coming 10 years. Once you know that those are the engineers you need, then the financing, the public financing follows that, follows what your need is, and those are the numbers you train. That is not happening in Africa. We need, as a policy coordination across Africa, to ensure that they empower our enterprises to become more competitive, more productive, and be able to compete globally, both in terms of the products they are producing, and that will even translate into the wages they pay and be able to attract more people into those fields.
Let's get a feel of these products that they are producing. Bridget, do you feel that universities need to rethink their models of learning, their approach to education, their approach to learning? Because modern life needs a holistic approach if you are to make it in life today.
I really do think that it should be evaluated because I spoke to an educator not too long ago, and he was saying he was priding himself in the fact that in his department a very, very minimal amount of people graduate with a first class, and that's because his course is very difficult. I wonder why a course being difficult should be something that one should pride themselves with. The working sector should also partner or be in sync with the educational system, because now they need to share ideas and say, okay, this is what we want and this is what you should give. We shouldn't have students going for IT and they're not getting the required information that is necessary for them to be employable.
Dr. Mueller raised an interesting issue, and which Bridget is also raising there, the question of university education being overemphasized. Are degree classifications still an important aspect of a job entry? Is that still a higher priority for the employer?
What is a priority to employer is the kind of skill you are bringing to the table and how productive you can be at the workplace. Now, the system that we have had across Africa was that in most cases we have been looking at the academic to try to gauge what level of skills you have. That is changing across Africa. You see today we have a lot of emphasis on the technical vocational education training system, the TVET system, trying to see how can we be able to recognize skills and competencies that a person has are not just about the degrees or the certificates the person has. And if that one is able to happen and give the employers the opportunity to know that, okay, if somebody comes with this type of qualification, then these are the skills he has, then that is going to be able to help. But the challenge is, as we are today, mostly the degree is still taken in the society to be something of very great value, other than just the skill that somebody has.
Right. Some statistics coming out of the United Nations, on average, the percentage of Africa's population that is under 25 today is 67%, making sub-Saharan Africa the region with the youngest population in the world. Now, the population as well is 1.2. By 2050, we'll be talking about 2.4 billion people, which means that there will be, still a shortfall in the labor market, but still a high number of university graduates coming out of colleges and universities. What would you suggest as solutions from your perspective to bridge that shortfall in the job market, as well as to cater for the needs of the students and the market as well?
As Stephen was noting earlier, one of the other issues, if we're concerned about unemployment, then there are many issues there around economic growth and industrial policy. So, for example, if one looks at currently developed countries or recently developing countries like the East Asian Tigers, a lot of unskilled labor was absorbed through manufacturing, and the nature of manufacturing has subsequently changed. So African countries are struggling to find areas in which they're competitive that are also labor absorbing. So it's not just, on the one hand, we've spoken a lot about the education system, and there is much that can be improved there, as I say, particularly at the basic education level, which is not something that people want to hear, because unfortunately improvements at the basic education level will take time to come through. I agree with Stephen that we can do better in terms of matching between technical skills and labor market requirements, but there are also much bigger questions here about what areas African economies can grow in that will absorb unskilled labor, because for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a large proportion, as you said, of youth and relatively unskilled, or even if they have education, it's not going to be up to the quality we want. So one of the most difficult challenges for African policymakers right now is to identify areas in which labor can be absorbed in a way that also hopefully creates some kind of decent life for African citizens once they get that kind of employment. And unfortunately, there are no easy solutions to that problem.
Right, Stephen, you have the final word.
We need to ensure that the education system is very well coordinated with industry involvement, such that whatever that is being taught in those systems speaks to what the industry needs. And that one ensures that when the student who has gone through this curriculum gets out and gets into employment, or into the labor market, then he's able to fit in well. And because we have an advantage as a continent, other regions are aging. Where is the labor of the world going to come from? It is going to come from Africa. We need policy that ensures that the ideas, the innovative ideas that are in the informal sector do not just remain in the informal sector. They grow to become formal businesses that are able to compete in the global market. And I'll give a very simple and interesting example. When we talk of the green economy, and you look at the solar panels, and we are trying to become green. Right. Where are these solar panels being manufactured? Let them be manufactured in Africa. They will create jobs in Africa for these youths. And if we do that and coordinate that across the policies and ensure that Africa remains integrated, moves as one block, then we are going to have to solve this challenge that we are facing with the youths.
Stephen, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you very much for your insight. That's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. But thank you to my guests, Dr. Sean Mueller, he's a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Johannesburg, Bridget Agba, founder, George Liu Apparel International in Nigeria, and Stephen Obiro, manager, research and policy advocacy at the Federation of Kenya Employers. Remember, we'd love to hear your feedback through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. And you can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist to keep the conversation going, and tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team in Nairobi, it's goodbye.